My dad disowned me at dinner. Then he found out what I had been hiding. I never thought I would hear my father say the words, "You're no longer my son," while sitting 3 feet away from me at the dinner table. But that night, he did. And the strangest part, he looked relieved, like he had been waiting years to finally say it. My name is Ryan, I'm 27 years old, and for most of my life, I believed my family was normal. Not perfect, but normal. My parents had been married for 30 years. My younger sister, Emily, was the golden child, and I was the responsible one, the one who worked, the one who paid his own bills, the one who never asked Dad for money, the one who stayed quiet whenever Emily needed something. Growing up, I used to joke that Emily could burn the house down and Dad would ask if she needed help finding a better lighter. I thought it was funny until I realized it wasn't a joke. It was our family dynamic. Emily was 3 years younger than me, and from the moment she was born, everything revolved around her. When she wanted dance lessons, Dad paid. When she wanted a new car, Dad helped her buy one. When she decided she wanted to go to an expensive college, my parents took out loans to help her. And when she dropped out after 1 year, nobody blamed her. Dad simply said, "She's young. She's figuring herself out." Meanwhile, when I was 18, I told my parents I wanted to attend college. Dad looked at me and said, "If you want it badly enough, you'll figure it out." So I did. I worked 2 jobs, I took night classes, I graduated with student loans and a very impressive collection of instant noodles, but I never complained because I honestly believed my parents were doing their best. At least, that's what I told myself. After college, I got a job in software development and moved to another city. My career took off faster than I expected. By 25, I was making more money than either of my parents had ever made. I bought a small house, I paid off my student loans, I even started investing. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable. And whenever I went home, I still acted like the same kid who needed permission to stay out past 10. Emily, meanwhile, was 24 and still living with my parents. She had changed jobs 6 times in 3 years. Every few months, she had a new business idea. One month, it was an online clothing store. Then it was handmade candles. Then photography. Then a wellness app. Every idea required money. And somehow, Dad always found it. I never understood where he got the money from until one afternoon, everything changed. I was visiting my parents for the weekend. Mom was in the kitchen. Dad was watching television. Emily was upstairs. I went into the garage looking for an old suitcase. That's when I noticed a folder sitting on Dad's workbench. It had my name on it. I wasn't trying to snoop. At least, that's what I told myself. But when I saw my full name printed across the top, I picked it up. Inside were copies of financial documents, bank statements, property records, and something that made my stomach drop. There was an investment account, a very large one, and the beneficiary listed on the account was me. I had no idea what it was. The account was worth over $180,000. I stared at the paperwork for almost a minute. Then I heard footsteps. I quickly put everything back. Dad walked into the garage. He looked at me, then at the folder, then back at me. "Find your suitcase?" "Yeah." He nodded, but his expression had changed. That night, I asked Mom about the account. She went completely silent. Then she whispered, "Your father wanted to tell you when the time was right." "What account?" She looked toward the hallway. "The money your grandfather left." I froze. My grandfather had died when I was 14. I barely remembered the funeral. Mom continued, "Your grandfather left money for both you and Emily." "Both of us?" "Yes." How much? She wouldn't answer. I asked again. Finally, she said, enough. I knew immediately that something was wrong. The next morning, I confronted Dad. He didn't deny it. He told me my grandfather had left 2 investment accounts, one for me, one for Emily. Mine had grown steadily over the years. Emily's had been used again and again and again. For college, for her car, for her businesses, for credit card debt, for vacations. Apparently, every time Emily needed money, Dad took it from her account. When I asked why, he said something I'll never forget. She needed it more than you did. I stared at him. She needed my money? She's struggling. So was I. You always figured things out. I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in my mind for years. Why did you always treat her like she mattered more? Dad looked offended. She's your sister. And I'm your son. He said nothing. I left that weekend without saying goodbye. For the next 6 months, I barely spoke to my family. Mom called occasionally. Dad didn't. Emily sent me one text. It said, "Stop acting like a victim." I didn't respond. Then, 6 months later, Dad called. He told me he wanted everyone to have dinner together. I almost said no, but Mom begged me. She said it was important, so I went. When I arrived, everything seemed normal. Mom had cooked my favorite meal. Emily was sitting at the table. Dad was unusually quiet. We ate for about 15 minutes. Nobody said much. Then Dad put down his fork. He reached beside him and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the table toward me. "Read it." I looked at the folder. "What is this?" "Open it." I opened it. The first page was a legal document. My heart started pounding. I looked at Dad. "What is this?" He said, "You're being disowned." The room went silent. I actually laughed. I thought he was joking. He wasn't. Dad explained that he had decided to remove me from the family trust. He said I had become disrespectful. He said I had turned against my family. He said I was selfish. Then he said something that hurt more than everything else. "You have money. Emily needs family." I looked at my sister. She wouldn't look at me. That was when I realized she knew. She had known this was coming. I closed the folder. Then I asked Dad one question. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "Absolutely." I stood up. "Okay." Dad looked surprised. "That's it?" I nodded. "You made your decision." I walked toward the front door. Then Dad called after me. "Ryan." I turned around. He said, "Don't come back." I looked at him. "You won't have to worry about that." And I left. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt strangely calm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn my father's approval. 3 weeks later, I received an email from an attorney. It was from my grandfather's estate lawyer. The email said, "Mr. Carter, I believe you need to know something regarding your grandfather's estate." I called him immediately. He asked me to come to his office. When I arrived, he showed me documents I had never seen before. My grandfather had created 2 separate trusts, one for me, one for Emily. But there was a condition. Neither trust could be accessed by my parents. The money belonged to us. My father had been legally managing Emily's trust, but he had apparently taken money from it without proper authorization. The attorney showed me the withdrawals. There were dozens. Some were small, some were enormous, and one transfer was for $72,000. I asked what it was for. The attorney looked uncomfortable. "Your father's company?" My father had secretly used Emily's inheritance to cover debts in his failing business. And suddenly, everything made sense. The expensive vacations, the constant financial emergencies, the pressure on Emily. Dad wasn't protecting her. He was using her. But there was more. The attorney handed me another document. It was my grandfather's final letter. It had been sealed until I turned 25. I read it slowly. My grandfather had written, "Ryan, if you're reading this, you're old enough to understand something I learned too late. Sometimes parents confuse control with love. Never allow anyone to convince you that being independent means you don't deserve support." I had to stop reading. Then I reached the final paragraph. "Your father may tell you that your sister needs the money more than you do. Do not let that become your burden. I left these funds equally because I loved you equally." I sat there, staring at the paper. My grandfather had known. Somehow he had known. The attorney then told me something even more shocking. My grandfather had specifically instructed that if either of his children misused the trust, the beneficiary had the right to take legal action. I didn't want to sue my father. I really didn't. But I also wasn't going to let him steal from Emily forever. So I hired an attorney, and that's when everything exploded. My father received the legal notice. He called me within an hour. "You're suing your own family?" I said, "I'm protecting my sister's inheritance. You're trying to destroy us." "No," I paused. "You did that yourself." He started yelling. Then Emily called. She was crying. She told me she had just learned the truth. Dad had told her for years that her inheritance was almost gone because of market losses. But the record showed something different. Most of the money hadn't disappeared. Dad had taken it. She confronted him. He admitted it, and then he blamed her. He told her, "If you hadn't needed so much help, this wouldn't have happened." Emily finally understood what I had understood years earlier. There was always a favorite, but there was also always a scapegoat. And when the family needed someone to blame, that person was usually me. Until now. The legal case took several months. My father eventually had to repay a large portion of the money. He also had to sell part of the business. My parents' marriage didn't survive. Mom left him, Emily moved out, and for the first time in our lives, she and I actually became close. One night, we sat on my porch talking. She looked at me and said, "I used to think Dad loved me more." I smiled sadly. "I know." "You knew?" "I always knew." She started crying. "I'm sorry." I told her she didn't have to apologize for being loved. She said, "But I let him treat you like you didn't matter." I shook my head. "You were a kid too." We sat there quietly. After a few minutes, she asked, "Do you hate Dad?" I thought about it. For years, I had imagined this moment. I thought I would say yes, but the truth was different. "No," I said. "I don't hate him." "Then what do you feel?" I looked out at the street. Nothing. And honestly, that was the strangest part. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need him to admit that I was right. I had spent my entire childhood waiting for my father to choose me. And eventually, I realized something. I could choose myself. A year later, Dad sent me a letter. It was short. He said he regretted what he had done. He said he had been under pressure. He said he wanted another chance. I read it twice. Then I put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I will. Maybe I won't. But here's the lesson I learned from all of this. Being related to someone doesn't give them unlimited access to your life. Being someone's child doesn't mean you have to accept disrespect. And sometimes, walking away from a toxic family dynamic isn't the end of your family. It's the beginning of your life. My father thought sliding those papers across the dinner table would make me feel like I had lost my family. Instead, it gave me something I had never had before: freedom. And ironically, the man who told me I didn't belong in his family was the person who finally taught me that I didn't need his permission to belong anywhere. I belonged to myself. And for the first time in my life, that was enough.